They always look down on me and the family because of what I did. They use a laugh. What are you restoring now? Another broken chair from the dumpster? But after what I did, they came asking me for money. Let me tell you how this whole mess started. My family never understood what I was doing with my life. While my older brother Jake was climbing the corporate ladder at some fancy real estate firm in Hartford, I was out there hunting through municipal auctions and estate sales, picking up beat-up furniture that most people would haul straight to the dump. My dad, a retired construction foreman who believed real men work with their hands building new things, not fixing old junk, would shake his head every time I rolled up to the family house with another trailer full of what he called garbage. He'd worked his whole life pouring concrete in framing houses, and here I was, his youngest son, spending my weekends at government surplus auctions bidding on desks that looked like they'd been through a tornado. The thing is, I've been doing this since I was a kid. While other kids were playing video games or shooting hoops, I was dragging home broken lamps from garage sales and trying to figure out how to make them work again. Something about giving new life to forgotten things just spoke to me. Maybe it was because I felt pretty forgotten myself most of the time. My mom tried to be supportive, bless her heart, but even she had her limits. Every family gathering turned into the same routine. Jake would show up in his BMW, talking about his latest six-figure deal, while I'd roll up in my beat-up Ford pickup with sawdust still in my hair from whatever project I'd been working on that week. The worst part wasn't even the comments about my work. It was the look they'd give me when relatives asked what I did for a living. That mixture of embarrassment and pity that said everything without saying anything at all, like they were apologizing for me existing. Things really came to a head last spring at Mom's birthday dinner. The whole extended family was there, packed into my parents' dining room that hadn't been updated since the Clinton administration. Jake was holding court as usual, fresh off closing some massive commercial property deal in Los Angeles. He was going on about flying first class and staying at some five-star hotel, making sure everyone knew exactly how successful he was. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there in my Carhartt work pants, probably smelling like would stain, just try to enjoy my mom's meatloaf in peace. That's when Jake decided to really twist the knife. Right there in front of everyone, aunts, uncles, cousins, the works. He starts it on me about my hobby. Called it cute that I was still playing with old furniture at 32 years old. Asked if I'd won any more treasures at the flea market lately, complete with air quotes and everything. The whole table erupted in laughter. Even my mom cracked a smile, probably just try and keep the peace. But sitting there, watching my own family treat my passion like some kind of joke, something inside me just broke a little bit. After dinner, I went out to the garage to grab my jacket, just wanted to get out of there and go home to my trailer where nobody questioned what I did or why I did it. That's when my dad followed me out. He stood there in the doorway, arms crossed, looking at me like I was some kind of disappointment he couldn't quite figure out how to fix. He didn't yell or anything. That might have been easier to deal with. Instead, he just looked me dead in the eye and delivered what felt like a death sentence wrapped up in calm, measured words. If I didn't get a real job by the end of the year, I shouldn't bother coming around anymore. Just like that. 40 years of being his son. And it all came down to whether I punched a time clock at some office or construction site. Didn't matter that I'd been supporting myself just fine with my furniture restoration business. Didn't matter that I genuinely loved what I did. All that mattered was that it didn't look respectable enough for the family name. I drove home that night with my stomach in knots and my head spinning. Part of me wanted to march right back in there and tell them all exactly what I thought of their opinions. But mostly I just felt hollow, like I'd been carrying around this hope that someday they'd understand, and it had just died right there in the garage next to Dad's old Craftsman toolbox. The funny thing about rock bottom is that it gives you a kind of clarity you can't get anywhere else. Sitting in my little trailer that night, surrounded by half-finished projects and the smell of wood polish, I made myself a promise. I was going to prove them wrong, not by changing what I did, but by being so good at it that they couldn't ignore me anymore. I had no idea that within a month, I'd stumble across something that would change everything. Something that would turn their laughter into awkward silence and their condescension into barely concealed envy. The next morning, I did what I always did when life got complicated. I fired up my laptop and started browsing municipal auction sites, looking for my next project. I figured if I was going to be the family disappointment anyway, I might as well lean into it. Besides, there's something therapeutic about taking something broken and making it beautiful again. Little did I know, I was about to find something that would prove just how wrong they all were about the value of old things. And more importantly, about the value of the person who knows how to see past the surface to find the treasure hidden underneath. So there I was the next morning, coffee getting cold in my favorite chip mug, scrolling through municipal auction sites like I was browsing Netflix. This had become my routine over the past 3 years. Wake up, check what government offices and schools were getting rid of, and see if there was anything worth salvaging. Most people don't realize how much good stuff gets thrown away by institutions. Schools upgrade their furniture every decade or so, and instead of selling it properly, they just dump everything in these online auctions where you can pick up solid wood desks for the price of a fast food meal. That's when I spotted it on the Hartford Municipal Surplus site. Lot number 142, office desk, solid wood construction, circa 1930-1950s. Condition, worn. The photos were terrible. Looked like they'd been taken with a flip phone in a basement with one flickering fluorescent light. All I could make out was this massive, dark wooden desk with what appeared to be multiple layers of old varnish and maybe some water damage on the top. The description was even more useless. Just a basic measurement. 60 inches wide, 30 inches deep, 40 inches tall, and a note that it came from the Hartford School District Administrative Building. No mention of the type of wood, the manufacturer, or any historical significance. Just another piece of unwanted furniture taking up space in their storage facility. But here's the thing about doing this for as long as I have. You develop an eye for potential. Even through those grainy photos, I could see the desk had good bones. The proportions were right. The construction looked solid, and that thick layer of old finish suggested it was built back when they still made furniture to last a lifetime. I'd learned early on that the best finds are usually the ones that look the worst in photos. Sellers don't want to invest time in making something look good if they think it's worthless, so the real treasures often get the worst presentation. This desk looked like it hadn't seen sunlight since the Carter administration. The bidding started at $5. I watched it for a few hours, and by noon it had climbed to $8. There were only 2 other bidders, and they seemed pretty half-hearted about it. I threw in a bid for $12 and figured I'd either win it or move on to something else. 20 minutes before the auction closed, I got the notification. I'd won $12 for what looked like a substantial piece of mid-century office furniture. Even if all I could do was clean it up and flip it for $50, that was a decent return on investment. But something about this one felt different. Call it intuition or just wishful thinking. But I had a good feeling about this particular gamble. The pickup location was this dreary government warehouse on the outskirts of Hartford, the kind of place that looks like it's been forgotten by time and municipal budget committees. I drove over there the next afternoon with my pickup truck and a furniture dolly, expecting the usual bureaucratic runaround. The guy working the dock was probably in his 60s. Looked like he'd been moving government surplus since the Kennedy administration. He checked my paperwork, glanced at the lot number, and just shrugged. Pointed toward a corner of the warehouse where a bunch of office furniture was stacked like a puzzle. Finding my desk took about 10 minutes of moving chairs and filing cabinets out of the way. When I finally got a good look at it, I understood why the photos were so bad. This thing was absolutely covered in decades of grime, old wax, and what looked like coffee stains that had become part of the finish. The surface was so dark and grimy that I couldn't even tell what kind of wood it was underneath, but the construction was incredible. Solid wood throughout, no particle board or veneer nonsense. The joinery was tight. The drawer still slid smoothly despite probably not being maintained since the Reagan era. This was definitely pre-1960s craftsmanship, back when they built office furniture like they were making family heirlooms. The warehouse guy helped me load it into my truck, mainly because he wanted to get back to whatever he'd been doing before I showed up. As we're wrestling this beast onto my tailgate, he mentions that it came from the old Hartford School District Administration building before they moved to their new facility. Said he remembered seeing desks just like it back in the 70s when he first started working for the city. probably belonged to some superintendent or principal, sat in the same office for 40 years before they decided to modernize with newer, cheaper furniture. His best guess was that it dated back to the 30s or 40s, based on the style and construction. Driving home with that desk on my truck bed, I felt that familiar excitement I got whenever I found something with real potential. Sure, it looked rough now, but I could already imagine what it would look like after I stripped off all those layers of old finish and brought the original wood back to life. I had no idea that this particular restoration project would end up changing my entire relationship with my family. All I knew was that I found another piece of forgotten history, and I was going to give it the attention and respect it deserved. Sometimes the best treasures come disguised as trash, and you have to be willing to see past the surface to find the value underneath. That night, I cleared a space in my workshop trailer and started planning my approach. This desk was going to be special. I could feel it. That evening, I dragged the desk into my workshop trailer and really got my first good look at what I bought. The Connecticut summer heat was brutal, so I propped open all the windows and set up a couple fans to move the air around. Working in that kind of humidity meant the wood stripper would take forever to do its job, but I was in no hurry. I started by removing all the drawers and hardware, laying everything out on my workbench so I could catalog what needed fixing or replacing. Most of the drawer pulls were original brass, tarnished black but still solid. The slides were wooden, hand-fitted and smooth as silk despite decades of use. This was definitely quality craftsmanship from an era when furniture was built to last generations. The desktop was in rough shape, covering what looked like 40 years of coffee rings, ink stains, and general abuse. Someone had even carved initials into one corner. Jam 1973, probably some bored administrator killing time during budget meetings. But underneath all that damage, I could feel the solid wood construction. This wasn't veneer over particle board like modern office furniture. This was a real deal. I decided to start with the pedestal sections, working my way around the desk systematically. The wood stripper went on thick and orange, immediately starting to bubble up layers of old varnish and paint. As I worked, I could smell decades of institutional life, that particular mixture of floor wax, mimeograph ink, and cafeteria food that every school building has. By the time I got to the left rear leg, I'd been working for about 3 hours and was getting into that meditative rhythm that comes with repetitive manual labor. Scraping off layer after layer of finish, watching the original wood grains slowly emerge like a photograph developing in a darkroom. That's when I noticed something odd. The wood stripper had revealed what looked like a hairline crack running vertically along the back edge of the leg. But when I ran my finger along it, it felt too straight, too precise to be natural damage. I grabbed my flashlight and took a closer look. It wasn't a crack at all. It was a seam. Someone had very carefully cut a panel into the back of the leg and fitted it so perfectly that it was nearly invisible under all those layers of finish. I tapped it gently with my knuckle and heard that unmistakable hollow sound that every woodworker recognizes immediately. Secret compartment. My heart started racing. In all my years of furniture restoration, I'd only found hidden spaces a handful of times, and they were usually empty except for maybe some old receipts or forgotten paperwork. But this felt different. The craftsmanship required to create such a perfect hidden panel suggested it was meant to conceal something important. I spent the next 20 minutes very carefully working the panel loose, using thin putty knives and gentle pressure to avoid damaging whatever might be inside. The wood had swollen slightly over the decades, making it tight, but eventually I felt it give way. The compartment was about 8 inches tall, 4 inches wide, and maybe 3 inches deep. Just enough space to hide something valuable, but small. And it wasn't empty. Wrapped in what looked like waxcloth, the kind they used for food storage before plastic wrap existed, was a bundle about the size of a paperback book. My hands were literally shaking as I lifted it out of its hiding place. I carried the bundle over my workbench and very carefully unwrapped it under the bright LED work light I used for detail work. The cloth was old but had done its job. Whatever was inside had been protected from moisture and decay for probably half a century or more. Inside were 3 items that made my knees go weak. First, 2 gold certificates. Not the modern commemorative coins you see advertised on late-night TV, but actual U.S. Treasury gold certificates from 1934, each one worth $1,000 in gold when they were issued. The paper was in incredible condition, crisp and clean like they'd been stored in a bank vault. Second, 3 gold coins that took my breath away. $20 St. Gaudens double eagles, the most beautiful coins ever minted by the U.S. government. The dates were 1911, 1924, and 1932. Even someone with my limited numismatic knowledge knew these were worth serious money, especially in the condition these were in. And third, a handwritten note on yellow paper that simply read, "Don't trust banks. Better wood than Wall Street. HM 1969 inch." I sat there in my sweltering workshop trailer, staring at what had to be tens of thousands of dollars worth of gold and currency, trying to process what had just happened. Someone, probably the HM who signed the note, had hidden this treasure in their office desk during the Nixon administration, when the government was having all kinds of monetary policy issues. I spent the next hour researching everything on my phone. The gold certificates alone were worth a fortune to collectors. Originals from 1934, in that condition, could sell for $5,000 to $10,000 each. The St. Gaudens coins were even more valuable, especially the 1932, which was minted in limited quantities. But here's what really got my attention. That 1932 double eagle wasn't just rare. It was museum-quality rare. Most of the coins from that year were melted down when Roosevelt took the country off the gold standard. The few that survived were worth astronomical amounts to serious collectors. Conservative estimate for everything? Maybe $200,000. Optimistic estimate? Could be over $1 million if that 1932 coin was as special as I thought it might be. I carefully wrapped everything back up and put it in my gun safe for the night. Then I sat on my trailer steps with a beer, watching the sun set over the Connecticut countryside, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. 24 hours earlier, I'd been the family disappointment who couldn't hold down a real job. Now I was potentially sitting on enough money to buy my dad's house outright. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd found a fortune hidden inside a piece of furniture that everyone else saw as worthless junk, just like they saw me. I should have known things wouldn't be that simple. About a week after my discovery, I was working on refinishing the desktop when my mailman knocked on my trailer door. He had a certified letter that required my signature, which is never a good sign when you're trying to keep a low profile. The letterhead read, Hartford School District Legal Department, in that official font that government agencies use to make everything sound more intimidating than it needs to be. The content was even worse than I'd expected. Apparently, someone at the municipal surplus office had done some checking after my purchase and discovered that lot number 142 had been improperly classified. According to their records, the desk had originally belonged to Howard Morrison, the Hartford School District Superintendent from 1947 to 1982. Morrison had been something of a local legend, a Depression-era kid who worked his way up from substitute teacher to running the entire district. The letter claimed that any historical artifacts or documents found within district property remained the property of Hartford Public Schools, regardless of the surplus sale. They were demanding immediate return of the desk and any contents, along with a detailed inventory of what I'd found. They gave me 10 business days to comply or face legal action for possession of stolen property. I read that letter about 5 times, getting angrier with each pass. These people had literally sold me this desk at a public auction. They'd had months to properly evaluate and catalog everything before putting it up for sale. Now they wanted to take it back because I found something valuable that they'd been too lazy or incompetent to discover themselves. The next morning, I drove into New Haven and met with a lawyer named Patricia Chun, who specialized in property law. She was probably 10 years younger than me, but she had this confidence that made you believe she could argue her way out of anything. After I explained the situation and showed her all my documentation, she leaned back in her chair and smiled. Her first question was whether I'd signed anything acknowledging that the desk might contain hidden items or agreeing to return any discovered property. I hadn't. The auction listing and bill of sale were completely standard, no special clauses or conditions. Chin explained that legally, I was in a pretty strong position. The school district had conducted a public auction with full legal authority to sell surplus property. They provided a description and photos. I'd bid in good faith, and the sale had been completed according to their own procedures. The hidden compartment changed nothing from a legal standpoint. If someone hides money in their house and then sells a house without mentioning the money, the new owner doesn't have to give it back when they find it. The same principle applied here. But she warned me that institutions like school districts have deep pockets and government lawyers who get paid whether they win or lose. They might drag this out just to make my life miserable, hoping I'd settle for less than the fine was worth. Over the next month, the legal back and forth got increasingly nasty. The district hired some big Hartford law firm that specialized in municipal cases. They filed motions claiming the desk had been miscategorized as surplus when it should have been preserved as a historical artifact. They argued that Morrison had been storing district funds in the desk, making the gold legally property of the school system. My lawyer countered with documentation showing that Morrison had purchased the desk with his own money in 1947 and had specifically willed it to remain in his office after his retirement. We found records proving the gold certificates and coins could not have been district funds, since schools weren't authorized to maintain gold reserves. The whole thing felt surreal. Here I was, defending my right to keep something I bought fair and square, while a bunch of bureaucrats tried to retroactively change the rules because they were embarrassed about missing $1 million treasure. The case finally went to court in late summer. The New Haven courthouse was exactly what you'd expect. Marble floors, high ceilings, and that particular smell of old books and floor wax that every government building seems to have. I wore my only decent suit, the one I bought for my cousin's wedding 3 years earlier. The district's lawyer was this polished guy in a $1,000 suit who kept referring to me as the defendant like I was some kind of criminal. He argued that the school district had never intended to sell historical artifacts, that the auction was only for surplus office furniture, and that any items of historical or monetary value should be returned to their rightful institutional owner. My lawyer, on the other hand, kept things simple. She presented the auction listing, the bill of sale, and a complete lack of any language reserving rights to hidden contents. She pointed out that the district had months to properly evaluate the desk before putting it up for sale, and their failure to discover the compartment didn't invalidate a legal transaction. The judge was this older guy who looked like he'd been dealing with municipal bureaucracy his entire career. He listened to both sides with the patience of someone who'd heard every possible variation of government incompetence over the decades. When it came time for his ruling, he was pretty blunt about it. The school district had conducted a legal public auction with full authority to dispose of surplus property. They had provided a description and photos that, while inadequate, met the minimum legal requirements for such sales. The buyer had purchased the item in good faith and had no obligation to compensate for the seller's failure to properly evaluate their property. He also noted that institutions regularly dispose of items without thorough examination, and accepting the district's argument would essentially invalidate every surplus auction ever conducted by creating an unlimited right to reclaim sold items. The gavel came down in my favor. I owned the desk and everything I'd found in it, free and clear. The district had to pay my legal fees on top of everything else, which probably cost them more than they would have made if they'd just let me keep the fine and taken percentage. Walking out of that courthouse felt like winning the lottery and getting revenge on every teacher who'd ever told me I'd never amount to anything, all at the same time. For once in my life, being thorough and paying attention to details had paid off in a way that nobody could argue with or minimize. But the victory celebration was short-lived. Within a week of the court ruling, the story had made it into the Hartford Courant and from there into the regional news. Local TV stations picked it up as a feel-good story about the little guy beating City Hall. And that's when my phone started ringing. First, it was reporters wanting interviews. Then it was other municipal surplus dealers trying to figure out my secrets. Coin collectors started calling, offering to buy various pieces of my find. Historians from Yale reached out, wanting to research Morrison's background and the significance of his hidden stash. But the calls that really got to me were from my family. People who hadn't spoken to me in months suddenly remembered my phone number. Cousins I hadn't heard from in years were reaching out to congratulate me and casually mention their financial difficulties. Even Jake called, though he mostly just wanted to know how much everything was worth. The whole experience taught me something important about family dynamics. When you're struggling, you're invisible. When you're successful, suddenly everyone wants to be your best friend. 2 weeks after court victory, I made the decision that would change everything. I contacted a private coin dealer in Little Rock, Arkansas, who specialized in rare American gold pieces. Guy named Robertson, no relation to my lawyer, who'd been collecting and dealing St. Gaudens double eagles for 30 years. Chin flew up to Connecticut to examine the 1932 coin in person. Spent 2 hours with a jeweler's loupe and some specialized equipment, checking every detail against his reference materials. When he finally looked up at me, his expression was somewhere between excitement and disbelief. The coin wasn't just rare, it was what collectors call museum quality. Perfect strike, no wear, original mint luster intact. Only about 400 1932 double eagles were ever released to the public before Roosevelt recalled all the gold coins. This one graded MS 65, which in collector terms means it's basically flawless, can offer me $820,000 on the spot. Cash deal, no questions asked, handled through his established network of private collectors who prefer to keep their transactions away from government attention. The kind of money that doesn't show up on tax forms or trigger federal reporting requirements. I took the deal. 3 days later, I had more money in my checking account than my father had earned in his entire 40-year construction career. But instead of blowing on cars or vacations or whatever people expect lottery winners to do, I decided to invest it in the one thing I'd always been passionate about, my work. I found a small industrial space in New London, about 2,000 square feet, with good lighting and proper ventilation for restoration work. The previous tenant had been some kind of marine supply company, so it already had heavy-duty electrical service and concrete floors that could handle the weight of serious woodworking equipment. I spent the next month setting up what I'd always dreamed of having, a proper restoration workshop, industrial-grade dust collection system, professional spray booth for finishing work, every tool I'd ever wanted but couldn't afford. I even bought a small forklift for moving heavy pieces, because my back wasn't getting any younger. The business name came to me while I was installing the sign out front, Semwood Restoration. Simple, professional, and it put my name right there for everyone to see. After years of working out a cramped trailer, having a real shop with my name on the door felt like finally becoming legitimate. I built a website, took professional photos of some of my best work, and started advertising in antique trade publications. Within a month, I had my first major client. The Mystic Seaport Museum wanted me to restore a collection of 18th century maritime furniture that had been damaged in a flood. The project took 3 months and paid more than I used to make in a year. But the real payoff was seeing museum visitors admire pieces that I brought back from near destruction, reading the little plaques that mentioned the restoration work, knowing that future generations would be able to appreciate these historical artifacts because of my skills. More clients followed. Estate attorneys started referring wealthy families who had inherited furniture they wanted properly restored. Antique dealers began sending me their most challenging projects. I even got a contract with the Connecticut State Museum to maintain their furniture collection. For the first time in my adult life, I was making serious money doing exactly what I loved. No boss, no time clock, no corporate politics. Just me, my tools, and the satisfaction of taking something broken and making it beautiful again. But success has a way of attracting attention you don't necessarily want. One Tuesday afternoon in October, I was working on a 1920s dining set when I heard a familiar voice call my name from the front of the shop. I looked up to see my mother standing in the doorway, holding what looked like a homemade apple pie and wearing the same nervous smile she used to have when she was about to ask me for a favor. Behind her was Jake, looking around my workshop with the kind of expression you'd have if you just discovered your homeless brother had been secretly living in a mansion. He'd driven her over from Hartford, probably hoping to get a look at how I was spending my newfound wealth. Mom made small talk for a few minutes, complimenting the shop and asking about my business. But I could tell she was building up to something bigger. Finally, she got to the point. Jake was having some financial difficulties. His real estate business had taken a hit during the recent market downturn, and he was facing some serious cash flow problems. She wondered if maybe I could help out family, just temporarily, until he got back on his feet. Nothing major, just enough to cover his mortgage payments for a few months while he rebuilt his client base. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a saw. 6 months earlier, this same brother had humiliated me in front of the entire family, questioning whether I'd ever make anything of myself. Now he was standing in my successful business, hat in hand, asking for money. I looked at Jake for a long moment, watching him squirm under my gaze. He couldn't quite meet my eyes, just kept staring at my equipment and muttering about how nice the place looked. The tables had turned so completely that I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Instead of answering right away, I walked over to the workbench where I'd been refinishing a chair leg and picked up my sandpaper. Started working while I talked, the way I always did when I needed to think. I told them about my recent projects, the museum work, the high-end residential clients, the waiting list of people who wanted my services. Mentioned how I'd had to turn down jobs because I was booked solid for the next 6 months. Let them understand that this wasn't just lucky break, but the result of years of developing skills they'd never valued. Then I looked directly at Jake and said something I'd been waiting years to say. I told him I had work available if he was interested. Hard, physical work that involved learning new skills and getting his hands dirty. Starting wage was $15 an hour, with potential for more if he proved he could handle the responsibility. The look on his face was priceless. Here was a guy who'd spent his career pushing paper and making phone calls, being offered manual labor by the brother he'd spent years looking down on. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It has a way of clarifying your priorities. Jake needed the money more than he needed his pride. After a few seconds of shocked silence, he asked when he could start. I put him to work the next day, starting him on the basics, sanding, cleaning hardware, preparing wood for finishing. Watching my older brother, the family golden child, learning to take direction from me was one of the strangest experiences of my life. He wasn't naturally good at it. His hands were soft from years of office work, and he had no instincts for working with wood. But he showed up every day and tried to learn, which was more than I'd expected. Over the following months, something interesting happened. Working together in the shop, away from family dynamics and childhood rivalries, Jake and I started to actually talk to each other like adults. He admitted that he'd always been jealous of my ability to create things with my hands, even when he was mocking it. Said he'd spent his career moving other people's money around and had never built anything lasting. I told him about the years of feeling like a failure, of wondering if maybe everyone was right about me wasting my life on old furniture, about the loneliness of having a passion that nobody in your family understood or respected. Gradually, we found a working relationship that neither of us had expected. He handled the business side of operations, scheduling, client communications, invoicing, while I focused on the actual restoration work. His sales background actually proved valuable when dealing with wealthy clients who expected a certain level of professional polish. By the end of the year, Semwood Restoration had grown from a one-man operation to a legitimate small business. We were employing 2 other craftsmen part-time and had a 6-month backlog of projects. Jake had proven himself competent enough to handle client consultations and project estimates, freeing me up to spend more time on the complex restoration work I enjoyed most. The desk that started it all sits in the front office now, fully restored to its original 1940s glory. The hidden compartment is still there, though empty now except for a copy of the newspaper article about my court victory. Sometimes clients ask about it, and I tell them it's a reminder that the most valuable things are often hidden in plain sight. My relationship with the rest of my family gradually improved too. Success has a way of rewriting history, and suddenly my years of struggling with furniture restoration became a charming story about following your dreams despite adversity. Dad even started bragging about my business to his retired construction buddies, conveniently forgetting about that ultimatum he'd given me. But the real satisfaction isn't the money or the family recognition, or even the successful business. It's walking into my shop every morning, seeing projects in various stages of completion, and knowing that I'm doing exactly what I was meant to do. Every piece of furniture tells a story, and I've become part of that story. taking something that others saw as worthless and revealing the beauty that was always there, waiting for someone who knew how to look. These days, when people ask me about finding that treasure, I tell them the real treasure wasn't the gold coins or certificates. It was a moment I realized that everyone who'd ever called my work worthless was wrong. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries aren't hidden in secret compartments. They're hidden inside ourselves, waiting for the right moment to prove what we've always known we were capable of. And sometimes, just sometimes, the family members who laugh the loudest end up being the ones who need you most.